The night was silent, but the ground was full of smoke and dust. The stars above were shining cold, and the moonlight touched the broken earth. A man walked slowly, his boots crushing burnt grass and black soil. His name was Daniel, a lonely traveler moving from one ruined world to another. He carried nothing except a small bag, a half-broken flashlight, and his courage. Daniel had seen many destroyed places before, but this night felt different. There was a strange smell in the air, a mix of burned metal and burned flesh. It was the smell of war, the smell of death. He tightened his jacket and moved closer to the valley where smoke was rising. The land was covered in shadows, but the fire from far away guided his steps. When he reached the valley, he stopped. In front of him lay the remains of a crashed ship half buried in the ground. Its body was torn apart, wires hanging like veins, fire still glowing on its surface. The metal looked alien, not like human ships, but something different. The surface was curved with strange symbols carved into it. Daniel knew at once. This was not a human ship. He held his breath, waiting, listening. At first there was only the crackling of fire and the sound of the wind, but then he heard something else, something soft, a cry, high and thin, almost like a newborn baby. His eyes widened, and he moved forward. Was it really a baby or some trick of his tired mind? He climbed over broken pieces of metal. The air was hot, smoke entered his throat, and it made him cough. As he stepped closer, the sound grew clearer. It was no machine, no echo. It was real. A baby was crying inside that broken ship. Daniel pulled away a piece of burned metal with his bare hands. The edge cut his palm. Blood ran down, but he did not stop. With every pull, the sound of crying grew louder. Finally, he saw movement in the smoke. His heart stopped for a moment. There, hidden in the wreck, was a woman. Her skin was pale blue, her hair long and silver like moonlight. Her body was weak, her face covered in ash and blood. In her arms, she held a small baby wrapped in a torn piece of fabric. The baby's tiny face shone with tears, eyes glowing faintly like stars. Daniel froze, staring. She was not human. She was alien. The woman looked at him with wide eyes full of fear. She tried to move back, pressing her baby. Closer to her chest, Daniel raised his hands slowly, showing he carried no weapon. "I will not hurt you," he whispered, though he knew she could not understand his words. The woman's lips trembled, her breathing was shallow. She was hurt, close to death, yet she did not care for herself. All her strength was wrapped around the crying child. For a long moment they only stared at each other, the human and the alien widow, one holding life, the other holding choice. The night was still, yet the sound of footsteps suddenly broke the silence. Daniel's head turned sharply, his heart raced. Someone else was coming. He crouched low, listening carefully. Voices echoed. In the valley, rough and sharp, soldiers searching the wreck. Their boots crashed against the rocks, their flashlights cut through the dark. They were not here to rescue. They were here to kill. Daniel looked back at the alien woman. Her eyes widened. She understood the danger too. The baby whimpered, louder, sharper. If the soldiers heard, they would find them in seconds. Daniel's mind worked fast. He had two choices: run away and save himself, or stay and protect this widow and her child. He looked at the baby's glowing eyes so full of innocence. He looked at the mother's trembling arms, her silent plea, and he knew he could not leave. Something inside him, deeper than reason, told him this was his fate. Quickly, Daniel moved fallen metal pieces and pulled the woman down. He covered her and the baby with broken panels, hiding them in the wreck. The baby cried, but he placed a finger gently on the child's lips. "Shh, little one," he whispered, voice soft like the night. The woman's hand touched his wrist, weak but full of trust. It was the first bond between them, a bond built in fear and hope. The footsteps grew closer. Voices shouted orders. Daniel pressed his back against the cold metal, waiting. The light from soldiers' flashlights moved. Across the valley, one beam almost touched the wreck where they hid. Daniel held his breath. The widow held her baby tight. Seconds felt like years. If they were found, death would come quickly. At last, the soldiers' voices faded, their boots moving further away. The valley grew quiet once more. Daniel exhaled, his chest shaking. He looked back at the hidden woman and her child. The baby blinked up at him with glowing eyes. And in that moment, Daniel understood. This was not just a discovery. This was the beginning of something that would change his life forever. The valley was silent again, but the silence felt heavy. Daniel's heart was still beating fast after the soldiers passed. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, his breath shaky in the cold air. Behind the broken metal, the alien widow and her baby stayed hidden. The baby's soft whimpering still echoed in the night. Daniel looked at the mother. Her eyes were wide, filled with both fear and hope. He knew one thing clearly. If the soldiers came back, they would not survive. The widow was too weak to run, her wounds deep and bleeding slowly. The baby was too small, too fragile to be carried far. And Daniel, one man alone, had no weapons and no allies. Yet something inside him told him he could not leave them. This was not just chance. This was destiny standing before him. The woman's lips moved. She whispered something in her alien tongue. Her words were soft, broken, yet Daniel could feel the meaning. She was begging him, pleading with her eyes more than her voice. Protect my child, protect us. He could not understand her language, but he understood her soul. In that moment, he faced the first true choice of his life. If he walked away now, he might live. If he stayed, danger would hunt him, soldiers would find him, and death would follow. His mind screamed to run, but his heart refused to move. He remembered the baby's glowing eyes, full of innocence. He remembered the way the widow placed her weak hand on his wrist. She had given him her trust, and that trust was heavier than chains. Daniel knelt closer to them. "I will help," he whispered, though he knew she did not understand. Still, the way her shoulders trembled told him she felt his promise. He pulled out a cloth from his bag, tearing it into strips. Carefully, he wrapped it around her bleeding arm. Her body shook, but she did not cry out. She simply looked at him with quiet strength, a mother's strength built from love and pain. The baby stirred, tiny hands reaching into the air. Daniel touched the child's hand gently. The baby's fingers curled around his, warm and soft. A strange feeling filled him, a warmth he had not felt in years. For so long he had walked this broken world alone. Now in the middle of fire and ruins he found connection, not with his own kind, but with strangers. Strangers who suddenly felt like family. The night grew colder, and the wind howled through the valley. Daniel knew they could not stay here. The soldiers would return with brighter lights and sharper eyes. The wreck was no longer safe. He needed to move them, but where? The nearest town was far, too far for a weak woman and her child. The caves in the forest. Yes, that could be a place to hide. But to reach it, they had to cross open ground. One wrong step and the soldiers would see them. Daniel's hands trembled as he thought of the risk. He had faced danger before, but never like this. This time it was not only his life on the line, it was the life of a mother and the life of a child. Still, he made his choice. He leaned close to the widow, pointing toward the forest hills. Her eyes followed his hand, then she nodded weakly. She did not know his words, but she understood his meaning. Together they would try. He lifted the baby into his arms. The child was light, smaller than he expected. The baby's head rested against his chest, heartbeats soft like a whisper. Daniel looked at the widow and reached out his hand. She hesitated, then slowly placed her cold fingers into his. It was a fragile grip, but it was also trust. Step by step, they left the wreck behind. Every crunch of soil beneath their feet sounded like thunder in the silent night. Behind them, the burned ship lay like a grave, smoke rising into the sky, a sign that could be seen from miles away. In front of them, darkness stretched endless. The forest seemed far, yet it was their only hope. They moved slowly, careful not to make noise. The widow leaned on Daniel for strength, her steps weak. The baby stirred but did not cry, as if sensing the danger. Only the wind carried their presence through the valley. Halfway across the field, Daniel froze. A beam of light cut across the darkness. The soldiers had returned, their voices sharp and near. Daniel pressed the widow down into the dirt, holding the baby close. The baby whimpered, tiny cries escaping. Its lips, Daniel's hand shook as he covered the child gently. "Please, little one, be quiet," he whispered. The widow's hand touched his arm, her eyes full of fear and prayer. The footsteps came closer, closer. Daniel's breath grew shallow. Every second felt like a blade. One soldier's light swept across the ground, almost touching them. If they were seen, there would be no escape. Daniel's mind raced. Should he run, fight, or stay hidden? He clenched his jaw, ready to shield them with his body if needed. But then, by some miracle, the soldiers turned away. Their voices faded once more into the distance. The danger passed for now. Daniel looked at the widow and her baby again. His chest burned with fear and relief. He knew this was only the beginning. From now on, his life would never be his. Alone. He had made his choice. He would protect them, no matter the cost. The forest stood like a wall of black shadows before them. Tall trees swayed in the cold wind, their branches like claws stretching across the night sky. Daniel stopped at the edge, breathing hard, holding the baby close against his chest. The widow leaned on him, her steps shaky, her face pale from pain and blood loss. Behind them, the glow of the wreck still lit the valley like a torch. If the soldiers looked back, they would see moving figures leaving the crash. Time was running out. They had to vanish into the trees. Daniel led the way, pushing through dry grass and low bushes. The forest swallowed them quickly, the light of the fire fading behind. Inside, everything was dark and damp, the air colder. The baby whimpered softly, its glowing eyes blinking up at Daniel. He pressed the child close, whispering gently, "Shh, you're safe now. Stay quiet." The widow followed, her steps slow, but her gaze sharp. Even in pain, she scanned the shadows as if she knew dangers. Daniel did not. The ground was uneven. Roots twisted like snakes under their feet. Every step made noise, every broken twig sounded too loud. Daniel's nerves were stretched thin. He felt like unseen eyes were watching them from every corner of the forest. Still, he kept moving, guiding the widow with one hand while carrying the child with the other. The night grew deeper and the forest came alive with sounds, strange chirps, low growls, the rustle of wings above. This was not a safe place, but it was their only hope. Hours seemed to pass, though it might have been only minutes. The widow stumbled, nearly falling. Daniel caught her, steadying her with his arm. Her body was burning with fever, her breath shallow. He wanted to stop, to rest. But he knew resting here could mean death. He whispered softly, "Just a little more. We'll find safety." She nodded weakly, her silver hair falling across her face. She trusted him, even when her strength was gone. Then it happened. A low growl echoed through the forest, deep and hungry. Daniel froze, holding the baby tight. The widow's eyes widened and she pressed herself against him. From the shadows, two glowing shapes appeared, beasts taller than men, with long bodies and shining teeth. Their eyes glowed yellow, their claws scraping the ground. They circled slowly, growling, their hunger clear. Daniel's heart pounded. He had no weapon, no gun, no blade, only his hands, his courage, and the fire of survival. He looked around quickly, searching the ground. His eyes caught a broken branch, thick and heavy. He grabbed it, lifting it like a club. The beasts growled louder, ready to attack. The baby began to cry, the sound sharp and trembling. The beasts moved closer, drawn by the sound. Daniel planted his feet firmly. He knew he could not outrun them. He had to fight, at least long enough for the widow and child to live. He raised the branch, shouting loud to distract the beasts. The forest echoed with his voice. One of the beasts leaped forward, teeth snapping. Daniel swung the branch with all his strength. The wood cracked against the creature's head. It screamed, falling back, but the other beast rushed in. The widow gasped, holding the child close. Daniel turned fast, swinging again. The branch broke this time, splintering in his hands. The beast clawed his shoulder, tearing his jacket. Pain shot through his body, but he refused to fall. He grabbed a burning stick from a fallen log nearby. Fire blazed at its tip. He thrust it forward, shouting. The beasts hissed and pulled back, their eyes flashing in fear. Fire. Their weakness. Daniel waved the burning stick, keeping them away. The creatures growled but did not come closer. Slowly, step by step, they backed into the shadows. Their glowing eyes lingered for a moment, then vanished into the trees. The forest grew silent again. Only the sound of the baby's crying remained. Daniel dropped to his knees, breathing hard. His shoulder burned with pain, blood dripping through his sleeve. But he was alive, and so were they. The widow knelt beside him. Her hand, weak but gentle, touched his wound. Her eyes shone with gratitude and sorrow. She whispered something in her language. Daniel could not understand the words, but he felt the meaning. It was thank you. It was trust. It was hope. He forced a smile, though his body trembled. "We're safe now," he said softly. Even if she could not understand, the calm in his voice gave her strength. He took the baby again, rocking the child until the crying faded. The small one fell asleep, tiny breaths warm against his chest. Daniel looked up at the sky through the trees. The stars were faint, hidden by branches, but he felt their light guiding him forward. The forest was still dangerous. The beasts might return, the soldiers might track their steps, yet Daniel knew they could not turn back. They had to keep moving, keep fighting. For the widow, for the child, for the fragile bond that now tied them together. He stood, gripping the burning stick tightly. The widow rose beside him, her body, weak but her spirit unbroken. Together they walked deeper into the unknown forest, each step heavy but each step alive with purpose. This was no longer just an escape. It was the beginning of survival. It was the path of family, born not of blood, but of choice. The forest grew calmer as the night passed. The wind still moved through the trees, but the cries of beasts faded into silence. Daniel walked slowly, his shoulder aching from the wound. The widow followed close, her arms wrapped tight around the baby. They were tired, broken, but still alive. And sometimes being alive was enough. They found a small cave hidden behind thick vines. The entrance was narrow, dark, almost invisible from the outside. Daniel pulled aside the vines and guided them inside. The air was cool, damp, but safe. No soldier lights, no growling beasts, only shadows and stone. For the first time since the crash, Daniel let himself breathe fully. He lit a small fire with broken branches. The flames crackled softly, painting the walls in orange. The widow sat near the fire, her baby resting in her lap. The child's glowing eyes blinked sleepily, then closed. The soft rhythm of its tiny breath filled the cave. Daniel watched, his chest heavy with feelings he could not name. He wanted to speak, to ask her name, but words were useless between them. Different languages, different worlds, yet the silence was not empty. It was full of unspoken understanding. The widow looked at him, her eyes shining in the firelight. She placed her hand over her heart, then touched her baby. Her gesture was clear. Her family, her life, her everything. Daniel nodded slowly, pressing his hand over his own chest. He pointed to her, then the baby, then back to himself. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, her lips curved into a faint smile. It was small, fragile, but in that smile was trust. A bond born in fire and fear was slowly becoming something deeper. He tore another strip of cloth from his bag and tied his bleeding shoulder. The widow moved closer, stopping him gently. Her hands trembled, but she reached into a small pouch tied to her torn clothes. Inside were strange leaves, glowing faintly, blue. She crushed them with her fingers and pressed them to his wound. The sting was sharp at first, then warm, almost soothing. Daniel blinked in surprise, the pain fading little by little. She whispered something, perhaps a prayer or a word of healing. He did not know the meaning, but he knew the kindness. Hours passed, the fire dimmed. The widow hummed softly, a lullaby in her alien tongue. The sound was strange, yet beautiful. It wrapped around the cave like a blanket, calming even Daniel's restless mind. The baby stirred, opened its glowing eyes, then reached out toward Daniel. Tiny fingers brushed his hand. A laugh escaped him before he realized. Soft and gentle, it had been years since he had laughed. The widow's eyes widened at the sound and her smile grew warmer. In that quiet moment, walls began to fall. They were no longer human and alien, no longer strangers bound only by survival. They were something more, a fragile family forming in the dark. Daniel felt a strange weight in his heart. For so long, he had been alone. Now, sitting by this fire, with a wounded mother and a small child, he felt less alone than ever before, but the world outside was not silent. Distant echoes of explosions rolled through the forest. The war was still raging, and soldiers were still hunting. Every moment of peace was a stolen gift. Daniel knew danger could return at any time, yet he also knew he would not run. He had made his choice. He would protect them no matter what. The widow seemed to sense his thoughts. She placed her hand on his, her touch light but steady, her eyes locked with his, filled with both fear and courage. She did not speak his language, but her gaze said everything. "We trust you, we believe in you. Do not leave us." Daniel nodded once, firm and certain. He whispered softly, "I promise." Even if she did not understand the word, she understood the feeling. Later, when the fire dimmed and the cave grew colder, the baby began to cry softly, its tiny body shivering. Daniel pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around the child. The widow looked at him, tears filling her eyes. She touched the fabric, then touched her lips, a gesture of thanks. Daniel shook his head gently as if to say it was nothing. But inside, his chest burned with something stronger. It was not pity, not duty. It was care for them, as if they were already part of him. As the night passed into dawn, the first rays of light touched the forest outside. Daniel sat awake, guarding the cave entrance with a piece of sharpened wood, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, yet his spirit alive, with purpose behind him. The widow and child slept peacefully for the first time since the crash, their breath slow, safe, full of fragile hope. Daniel looked at them one last time before facing the forest again. He whispered to himself, "This is my family now." The words were quiet, but they were true. The bond was no longer just survival, it was love growing in silence, and that bond would soon be tested, harder than ever before. The morning sun rose weakly over the forest. Its pale light slipped through, the branches painting the ground in broken shadows. Daniel stood at the cave's entrance, his eyes sharp, his body tense. The widow and her baby still rested inside, their breathing calm. For a moment, peace seemed possible. But deep inside, Daniel knew peace never lasted long. The quiet was broken by a sound. Distant voices carried by the wind, rough and harsh. Soldiers. They had found the trail. Daniel's heart raced. His breath caught in his throat. He turned quickly to the widow, gesturing with his hands. "Wake up, we must go," his voice urgent. She did not understand the words, but she saw the fear in his eyes. She rose weakly, clutching her baby, and followed him without question. They left the cave, pushing through bushes and tall grass. Daniel moved fast, guiding them along narrow animal paths. Behind them, the voices grew louder, the sound of boots crushing soil. The soldiers were coming closer, their shouts sharp, their weapons ready. The baby whimpered, its small cry echoing in the stillness. Daniel pressed a finger gently to the child's lips, whispering, "Not now. Little one, please." The widow hugged the child tighter, her steps stumbling but determined. The forest seemed endless, yet not enough to hide them. Every broken branch, every footprint in the dirt betrayed their path. Daniel knew it was only a matter of time before the soldiers caught them. Still he pushed forward, sweat dripping down his face. Branches scratched his arms, his wounded shoulder burned, but he ignored the pain. His only focus was escape. Suddenly, the ground opened ahead into a wide clearing. Beyond it, a broken bridge stretched over a deep river. The wooden planks were old, many missing, the ropes frayed. It was dangerous, but it was their only chance. Daniel stopped, his eyes scanning the bridge. One wrong step could send them falling into the dark water below. But behind them, the sound of soldiers grew louder. They had no choice. He stepped onto the bridge first. Testing the ropes, the wood creaked under his weight, but it held. He turned back, nodding to the widow. Her face was pale, her eyes full of fear. But she stepped forward, clutching her baby close. The ropes swayed, the planks groaned. Step by step, they moved across. Halfway across, a shout rang out. "Over here! They're on the bridge!" Daniel's blood turned cold. Soldiers had reached the clearing, their rifles raised, shots fired, bullets tearing through the air. Wood splintered, ropes shook violently. The widow cried out, shielding her baby with her body. Daniel spun, shouting, "Move! Faster!" He rushed forward, grabbing her arm, pulling her across. The bridge swayed wildly, bullets striking the planks. Pieces of wood fell into the raging river below. The sound of water crashing against rocks rose up like thunder. The soldiers shouted, firing again. But the bridge was long, and their aim was broken by distance. Daniel forced every step, dragging them toward the other side. At last, his boots hit solid ground. He pulled the widow onto the bank, both of them collapsing in exhaustion. The baby cried, its small voice piercing the forest air. The soldiers shouted behind them, preparing to cross. But before they could step forward, the bridge gave way. The ropes snapped under the weight of bullets in time. With a loud crack, the bridge fell into the river. Water swallowed it whole, carrying the wreckage downstream. The soldiers cursed, their voices fading into the distance. Daniel lay on the ground, breathing hard, his chest burning. He looked at the widow, who clutched her baby tightly. Her eyes shone with tears, but also relief they were alive. For now, Daniel pushed himself up, scanning the forest ahead. "We can't stop," he whispered, though he knew she couldn't understand. Still, the urgency in his voice was clear. He offered his hand, and she took it without hesitation. They moved deeper into the forest, every step heavy, every breath sharp. The soldiers would not give up so easily. The broken bridge might slow them, but it would not stop them. Daniel knew the hunt would continue, yet as he glanced at the widow and the baby, he felt a fire inside him stronger than fear. He had faced beasts, fire, and bullets, and he would face much more, because now he was not only fighting for himself, he was fighting for family. The sun climbed higher, lighting the path with golden rays. Birds scattered from the trees, startled by distant shouts. Daniel held the child closer, guiding the widow with steady steps. Though danger followed, though the chase was far from over, he felt their bond tighten with each heartbeat. This was not just escape anymore. This was survival together, and survival meant never letting go. The forest stretched ahead, full of unknown dangers, but Daniel did not slow down. He looked at the widow, then at the child, and silently, he made another promise. "I will not fail you," he whispered to himself. No matter how long the chase lasted, no matter the cost, he would keep them safe. The forest grew darker as evening fell. The golden light of the sun faded behind the hills, leaving the trees heavy with shadows. Daniel guided the widow and her baby along a narrow path, his steps slow but steady. Every muscle in his body ached, his shoulder burned with pain. Yet, he refused to stop. The widow's face was pale, her body trembling with every step. Her strength was fading, and Daniel knew it. She tried to walk without showing weakness. But the truth was clear in her eyes. Her breaths were short, her lips dry, her wounds worse than before. Daniel reached out, catching her as she stumbled. The baby cried softly in her arms, as if sensing the danger. Daniel whispered, "I've got you," though she could not understand his words. Still, She looked at him with tired eyes, filled with trust and sorrow. They stopped in a small clearing, hidden by rocks and fallen trees. Daniel lowered her gently. To the ground, he searched his bag for water, offering it to her. She drank only a little, then shook her head, pushing it back to him. She wanted him to take it instead. Daniel frowned, refusing, and gave it to the baby instead. The child's glowing eyes blinked as it sipped. The widow watched with a weak smile, as if that was enough for her heart. Hours passed and night settled deep around them. Daniel built a small fire to keep them warm. The widow cradled her baby, humming softly though her voice cracked. Her song was broken, but it carried love stronger than any words. Daniel listened, his chest heavy with emotions he could not speak. He saw the way her hands shook, the way her head leaned forward as if she had no more strength. She was slipping away piece by piece. At last she turned her gaze to him. Her lips moved, whispering, words in her alien tongue he could not understand, but she pointed to the baby, then to him. Her eyes filled with tears, her meaning clear. Protect my child even when I am gone. Daniel shook his head quickly, his voice sharp. No, don't say that. You'll live. We'll find help. But she only smiled weakly, shaking her head. She knew her body was breaking, and she wanted him to accept the truth. The baby reached up, touching her face. Her tears fell as she kissed the child's forehead. Then she looked back at Daniel, her eyes fierce despite her weakness. She pressed her hand against his chest, right over his heart. It was not a gesture of thanks this time. It was a command, a promise she was forcing him to take. Daniel's throat tightened, his hands shaking. He whispered, I swear, I'll protect your child. I swear it. She seemed to understand, her lips curving into a faint smile, but their moment was broken by distant shouts. The soldiers had not given up. Their voices carried through the trees, closer than before. Daniel's heart sank, his mind racing. They had to move, but the widow could barely stand. He lifted her arm, trying to help her rise, but she pushed him away, shaking her head firmly. Her eyes told him everything. She could not go on. If she slowed them now, they would all die. Daniel's chest burned with anger and pain. He did not want to leave her. He could not. But she reached for a sharp stone on the ground. She pressed it into his hand, her eyes fierce again. Not for attack, but for survival. She was giving him something to fight with. Her last gift. Her last hope. The soldiers' lights flickered in the distance, moving closer. The widow pulled herself up with the last of her strength. She kissed her baby once more, then placed the child into Daniel's arms. The baby cried, tiny hands reaching back for her. Her tears fell like rain, but she did not break. She whispered something soft, her voice filled with love and finality. Then she turned, walking weakly toward the sound of soldiers. Daniel froze, horror in his chest. He understood what she was doing. She was giving herself up to save them. No, he whispered, but his voice broke. He wanted to chase her, to drag her back. But the baby's small weight in his arms stopped him. The child's cries pulled him down, anchored him to the promise he had made. He knelt low behind the rocks, holding the child close. Through the trees he saw her stumble into the open, her body frail, her steps uneven. The soldiers shouted, raising their weapons. She spread her arms, standing tall despite her weakness, a mother's final act of defiance. The gunfire tore through the night. Daniel closed his eyes, pressing the baby's face into his chest. Tears burned his cheeks, his body shaking with rage and grief. The soldiers' voices echoed, their boots crashing through the forest. But her sacrifice had bought them precious moments to escape, moments to live. Daniel rose, clutching the child close, his jaw tight. He whispered, I will not waste her gift. And with that, he disappeared into the forest shadows. The night swallowed him and the child. The fire behind them died, leaving only smoke and ashes. The widow's voice, her song, her strength, lingered in Daniel's heart. He had lost her, but he had gained a purpose stronger than his own life. The chase was not over, the danger not gone. But now, Daniel was no longer just running. He was carrying her promise, her love, her sacrifice. And nothing in this world would stop him from protecting the child. The forest seemed endless, but Daniel did not stop. He carried the baby in his arms, his body bruised, his heart heavy with grief. The widow's final sacrifice burned inside his memory. Her voice, her last smile, her eyes full of love haunted him with every step. But so did her promise. The promise he had made to her: protect the child no matter what. Days passed as Daniel moved through the wild land. He found water in streams, berries on bushes, and hunted small creatures to survive. The baby cried often, needing warmth and comfort. Daniel gave all he had, wrapping the child in his jacket, holding it close at night. Sometimes when the baby laughed, it healed a small piece of his broken heart. But when the child cried in the silence of night, Daniel's tears mixed with its own. At last, he saw the walls of a human colony rising in the distance. Tall metal fences surrounded the settlement, with guards patrolling on the towers. Smoke curled from chimneys, lights flickered in windows. It was safety, the first he had seen in weeks. Daniel's legs shook as he walked toward the gate, the baby in his arms, its glowing eyes staring at the strange sight. The guards spotted him, their rifles raised. "Stop! Who goes there?" one of them shouted. Daniel raised his free hand slowly, showing he was not a threat. "My name is Daniel," he called back, his voice rough from days without rest. "I come seeking shelter." The guards lowered their weapons a little, but then their eyes fell on the child. The glow in the baby's eyes was clear, unhuman, alien. Gasps and whispers spread among the guards. "That's not human," one hissed. "He's carrying one of them." The gates opened, and the colony leader stepped forward, a tall man with cold eyes and a voice like iron. "You may enter," he said slowly. "But the child stays outside." Daniel's heart froze. He clutched the baby tighter, shaking his head. "No," he whispered, then louder. "No, this child stays with me." The leader's expression hardened. "Do you not understand? They are the enemy. Their kind killed ours, burned our cities, destroyed our homes." Daniel's jaw tightened, his voice sharp. "And yet this child did nothing. This child is innocent." The crowd gathered near the gates, whispering, arguing. Some looked with anger, others with fear, but a few looked with quiet curiosity. Daniel stood tall, though his body was weak. He held the child high in his arms for all to see. "This baby has no one, no family but me," he said firmly. "If you hate it, then hate me as well, for I am its father now." His words rang through the silence. The baby looked at him, tiny fingers clutching his shirt. The crowd grew restless. Torn between fear and compassion, the leader's eyes narrowed. "You would risk everything for that creature?" Daniel's voice broke, but his will did not. "Yes," he said. "Because family is not blood. Family is choice. And I have chosen this child." The silence stretched, heavy as stone. At last, the leader turned away with a scowl. "Then your fate is your own," he said coldly. "Stay if you wish, but do not expect kindness from my people." With that, he walked back into the colony, leaving Daniel at the gate. Slowly, the crowd began to fade. Some stared with hatred, others with pity. But no one came forward to tear the child from his arms. Daniel stepped inside, carrying the baby close. He was given no welcome, no home, no warm meal. Yet he did not care. He had shelter now, and that was enough. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The baby grew stronger, smiling more often, laughing at the smallest things. Daniel taught it to walk, holding its hands as it stumbled across the floor. At night, he whispered stories to it by candlelight. Stories of bravery, of hope, of family. The child did not understand the words yet, but it understood the warmth in his voice. The people of the colony kept their distance. Some glared when Daniel passed, others muttered under their breath. But, slowly, quietly, a change began. Children in the colony came close, curious about the glowing-eyed baby. They laughed when it laughed, touched its small hands, and their parents, though fearful, began to soften. They saw not an enemy, but a child, like any other. One night, Daniel stood outside the colony walls. the child in his arms pointing up at the sky. The stars shone bright, endless, and cold. But in his heart he felt warmth. He remembered the widow, her sacrifice, her last smile. He whispered softly, "He is safe. I kept my promise." The child leaned against his chest, eyes glowing like stars themselves. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not only of sorrow, they were of love, of hope, of new beginnings. For he had lost much, but he had also gained something greater. He had gained family, not born of blood, not born of the same world, but family, born of choice, of love, of sacrifice, and as long as he breathed, he would never let it go.